Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we are talking about the boomers, right? Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and made it through alive. You know, as everyone was talking about in the media and everywhere, you know, how to address your bigoted relatives at the dinner table over Thanksgiving, and, you know, basically it's impossible to have a decent holiday anymore because people just spew their political ramblings all over everyone. And really, I'm not talking about everyone in general, I'm just talking about the liberals. Right, it seems like conservatives actually have a pretty good lock on, you know, what is appropriate speech. You know, I don't know. I don't have any super gung-ho MAGA family, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But at least in our neck of the woods, for Space Panther and myself, for our family, it's just liberal crap that's just being vomited on everyone all around them. And the funny thing is that when you actually even just ask a honest, pointed question, or even respond to their questions honestly, they will absolutely lunge for your throat and will freak out and will snap entirely. And so this video is a little bit of me just kind of venting about the boomers right now, because it's one thing when people come up and throw that stuff in my face, but it's another thing when they try and ambush my wife and try and get her to, you know, accede to the progressive cult and the dogma, right? And then she says, you know, after being basically poked and prodded, you know, some family members asking Space Panther, oh, which Democrat candidate are you going to vote for? She says, well, I'm not exactly a Democrat, you know. And to which the family member responded, well, there's really only Trump on the other side. And to which Space Panther said, yeah, I'll probably vote for Trump again, because the Democratic Party is just such a shit show, and they're a total joke. And that pretty much set off a little bit of a bomb in the family environment, right? All of a sudden, all of the liberal family members just, oh my God, what about all the unethical things he's done? Right, just basically popped their little bubble and started spewing it all over everyone. And I'm just over it, really. I'm going to be doing another video here shortly about, you know, 2020 and what next year really means on more than just a political level, on a metaphysical level. Right, it's 7 years past the original December 21st, 2012, right, which passed without much note for most people. For some people, it was very much a meaningful gate to pass through, and we're about to pass through the second gate. But again, moving on, this is just, we are crossing the Rubicon in a sense. You know, there's a world coming into being, and there's a world falling away. You know, and I call these fifth world and sixth world, right? The boomers are basically the pinnacle fifth world. They are peak fifth world of just everything like what you see here, of just boxes on boxes, of just, you know, the Piscean age of materialism in ever greater, you know, packaged forms. And who can get the biggest boxes, who can get the most boxes, right? Who can basically just be the biggest fish. And this world is everything they've ever known, right? It's their entire mode of operating is just how to be, you know, in the social environment of the boxes, and how to raise yourself so you can be on the tallest box, right? All these skyscrapers. Like, never mind the fact that all these people are just being, their DNA is being microwaved. All of these people are stuck inside of a world that worships death and is slowly but surely killing them all by just being present in such an artificial matrix. And, you know, again, we're very grateful to live out here in the forest, out here in the Sierra Nevadas of California, soon to be the state of Jefferson once we get our secession going. But with all the things that are going so insanely wrong in this state, in this country, I'm more optimistic than most about the chances for secession. You know, and this is funny, the family members who are, you know, trying to ambush Space Panther are also, you know, they live in one of the wealthiest communities of Southern California, you know, and they should just, you know, basically talking about, oh, we love everything about California. California is perfect. We've got no complaints, right? We're liberal. We love all the liberals. And it's just all so ridiculous, you know. It's like, okay, boomer, right? You've created this little enclave for yourself in a world that is collapsing, and you love it. That's great. You love it because, you know, basically you are benefiting from the state of corruption, right? You love the world of boxes. You like having your own little ungotten wealth, you know, within it. and just sapping off of all the people around you, right? And liberals today, you know, there used to be good liberals. I used to enjoy talking to liberals. I used to even be a liberal, right? A lot of us used to be liberals. And it's funny because this one particular family member who is gung-ho liberal, you know, has a twin, and the twin was also at the Thanksgiving you know, a gathering, and this twin is also liberal, but she's the kind of liberal that I actually enjoy, the real liberal, the one that likes you know, world peace and actually can listen to people and have a rational conversation and just believes that people should be treated equally. That's the good kind of liberal. I like those people, and I got nothing wrong with them. They might be mistaken on certain economic matters, but, you know, they're good people. There's nothing wrong with wanting, you know, people to be lifted out of poverty. It's just a question of, are you doing it in a way that's going to work, or are you just making it worse by trying to hand them out more, you know, free things? Right. And it's funny because this person had lived abroad you know, for several years, and then came back to the United States. And I've seen this with a couple other friends who were very liberal, and they went and, you know, lived abroad for the last, you know, several years, and then came back. So they missed out on 2015, 2016, right? Or at least they missed out on a lot of this transition, the Obama transition that turned anti-war liberals into establishmentarian imperialist liberals, right, who wanted to impose their warped worldview on the entire planet, you know, in the name of humanity and humanitarianism and democracy and human rights, right? Nothing could be further from the truth than these, you know, pathetic pseudo-explanations. But, you know, it's the Obama years were when all the liberals just basically fell asleep. And it's only the ones that left the country that actually came back with clear eyes. Everyone who stayed, right, you either became a Ron Paul Republican and woke up to the nature of, you know, the Democratic Party and the liberal, progressive, you know, communist authoritarian narrative, or basically you drank the Kool-Aid and you became an Obama Democrat who just went to sleep. Everything became social justice and trannies and gays and, you know, basically just the complete abolition of the American family and all traditional aspects of our society. And these people are still cheering it on. Again, it's funny because the whole structure that built all this wealth, you know, they're now campaigning for the destruction of, right? Now that they've gotten all their wealth and they're sitting on it, right, they're just going to pull up the ladder and screw all the rest of us. And so here enters the term, okay, boomer, right, of these people that are so entitled, so insanely entitled, and it is their generation who, you know, either directly caused the fall of this country to where it is now, or allowed it to happen through their ignorance and negligence, right, being asleep at the wheel, being high on drugs, being out at concerts, being drunk, right, being locked into their little social matrix, or just basically, you know, riding up the corporate ladder and exploiting, you know, everyone as much as possible. And again, I'm a very much a free market person, but corporate capitalism, and especially state subsidized crony corporate capitalism, say that 3 times fast, is not really anything to do with the original American system of capitalism. It is, you know, the largest companies are structures and emanations of the state, right? And not least of which are the new structures of Facebook and Google and Twitter. They are all absolutely structures of the deep state, and their prime purpose, why they were established, was to centralize communication so that communication could be centrally controlled. And so, you know, I'm going to read an article here basically explaining the history of the Ukraine situation, right? All these liberals, Ukraine, impeach. And how many of these idiot liberals know even the basic rudimentary aspects of recent geopolitics and history, right? How many of them even know what happened during the Obama presidency? How many of them know what happened in Libya or Ukraine, right? That basically 2 sovereign nations were completely overthrown in coups during the Obama years, right? These morons, these New York Times sipping idiots will say, oh, there were no scandals during the Obama years. I love the Obama years. No scandals at all. Right, there were no scandals because the media is complicit with empire. They are completely the fourth estate. They are the extension of the secret government of the CIA, the FBI, and all these intelligence apparatus. Right, and all of the foreign intelligence services of these allied countries of the Western Empire, they're just extensions of the CIA and the intelligence services as well. right? So when we talk about our allies, all our allies, right? It's all the empire. It's just it's a unitary, basically a monolithic aspect. These countries have different nominal interests. They have different people, right? Just like America has its own interests. The American people want, peace. We want to live our lives and develop our own country, right? America first. But we can't have that because of all this nanny state humanitarian bullshit that we need to go and help every single one in the world because, we're the good white liberals and we need to save all the poor brown people that can't do anything for themselves. It's like the ultimate form of racism is white liberalism, right? Ask a white liberal why voter ID laws are racist, right? Oh, black people and Mexicans can't get driver's licenses because I guess they're just too stupid to go to the DMV, right? Even though they need one to buy alcohol, they need one to drive. You can be an illegal immigrant and still get a driver's license. But no, you're too stupid to get one to vote. That's what the white liberals say. And it's just, at a certain point, intolerable. Especially since I got sick with E. coli, I haven't been drinking at all. I usually... don't drink that much, but I usually have, maybe 1 or 2 beers on most days, but I haven't been drinking at all. And so my ability to keep my lid on, so to speak, is a little greater than it normally is. And so, I didn't start any fires at the family dinner table over the Thanksgiving holiday, and again, Panther got ambushed, and nobody would say a word to me, right? They'll ambush my wife, who's, not even overtly political, but they won't come at me, right? Even when Panther pretty much directed him, he said, I'm not the big Trump guy. You should talk to, Mango. No, of course, none of them did. Nobody wants to actually have a debate or a discussion with somebody who knows what they're talking about. They just want to belittle and berate and bully and just be these pseudo-intellectuals and pretend like they have the slightest clue what they're talking about, when in reality, they certainly do not. So, in a second, we're going to get into here an article about Ukraine and about how the Obama administration and Joe Biden acting, Obama was servant of empire, right? Completely a servant of empire. Joe Biden, servant of Obama, also a servant of empire. And so, when we say that the Obama administration was doing these things, right, it's the deep state. It's the CIA and basically this entrenched, unelected government of permanent bureaucrats, and they operate on behalf of the billionaires. And, if you want to talk about the Rothschild, it's basically trillionaires, right? They serve this ruling class. And you're supposed to believe that that's just a conspiracy theory, I guess, even though it's self-evident and documentable all the way back to not just the founding of America, but going back to, basically Roman times, right? The aristocracy didn't just poof, start up at the beginning of the 20th century, right? It's been there's the new money and the old money at any given point in history, but it's that ruling class that, pulls the levers and strings of government. And that is true today, and it was true long ago. But, what's changing is the new Gutenberg Bible, is the new printing press, is the internet, right? The internet is the greatest threat to them and their control over narrative and control over information, which is control over the people. If you control the narrative and the stories that people tell to themselves, then you completely have them controlled. You don't need any iron bars. You don't need guns or weapons or, anything as far as physical barriers, because you have control to their minds. And these liberals are completely mind controlled. And, there's conservatives and Republicans who, are of mediocre, lesser intelligence. Yes, the enthusiastic MAGA team of people, in the down south and whatnot. But you know what? I used to hate them a lot when I was younger. I don't hate them at all now. I see them as the salt of the earth. As Tolstoy realized, it's those people who are the actual happy ones. And it's really these miserable pseudo-intellectuals in the cities that are the hateful ones, and the ones that are basically destroying society because they have a profound sense of just void and guilt and anxiety within themselves, right? They killed God, and now they bemoan his, the lack of God's presence. But, of course, God never left this planet, and we're going to explain in 2020 exactly what it means to be in alignment with God on this planet in 2020. Anyway, so let's get to the Ukraine article, and enough of the New York skyline. Oh yeah, this happened too. Trump posted a picture on Twitter of him with his face on Rocky Balboa, and the media basically just, their heads exploded. Trump posted a picture of himself as Rocky. No one knows what to make of it. Okay, Poppy Noor. All these commies in the media. I'm better at ever than at keeping my lid on, but I absolutely hate all of the media. I hate all of liberal society. I can't stand it. And I have to make videos like this. I know that hardly anybody's going to see it, but for me, it's a service to myself. And, to those of you who are still around, God bless you. I love you guys. Anyway, let's get to it. Ukraine, Trump, and Biden, the real story behind Ukrainegate. And the author, Eric Zeus, is, he's far from a Republican. Again, the reason that I chose this story is because it explains the situation with Ukraine better than any that I've seen. And also, I just want to make the point clear that there's a Democrat, there's a liberal psychology and narrative that I do respect, and it is absolutely a necessary counterpoint to the viewpoint of, unfettered capitalism, growth at all costs, basically the standard Republican narrative needs to be checked by intelligent liberal narratives like this, like Eric Zeus. And when these type of people don't get coverage, and instead it's the Russia, 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 Ukraine, 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 Adam Schiff, the commie pedo traitor, and all this nonsense from Maxine Waters and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and now Nancy Pelosi's basically just thrown up her hands and given in to the whole thing. It's all garbage, and it's all out there not just to brainwash, but to distract, right? Because if they can keep you, even if you can identify it as bullshit, if your time is completely consumed in just saying, oh, that's bullshit, you miss what's actually happening, like the Patriot Act just got renewed. But anyway, so Eric Zeus, starting off, since this news report is going to be especially harsh regarding today's Democratic Party in the United States, readers should be aware that until that party nominated Hillary Clinton in 2016, this writer was and consistently voted as a Democrat, and that I have never been and never could be a Republican. In no way does this article reflect a Republican viewpoint. It is not partisan, not favoring one person's viewpoint over any others, though it does favor trustworthy evidence over untrustworthy hearsay and witnesses, etc. This article is written by a consistent progressive, which means a person whose top value is truth, nothing else than 100% honesty and reflecting only personally verified sources, real facts. Intense care has therefore been taken in checking and cross-checking and validating information before accepting here anything as constituting information instead of being disinformation, which is sadly rampant. The following article is written only because it reports what my own independent research have found to be the actual case regarding what is now commonly called Ukrainegate, the focus of the impeachment proceedings against U.S. President Donald Trump. And pursuant to that warning, before we really get into the substance of it, I do not agree with everything presented here. I do not agree 100% with Mr. Zeus's narrative, but I'll have my sidebars here throughout, but it's just, again, this is the intelligent liberal narrative. Part 1. Trump's July 25th, 2019 phone call to Zelensky. The news media and the Democrats have been grossly misrepresenting what the Ukrainegate narrative and the impeachment proceedings against the current U.S. president are all about. And as a result of this widespread misinformation, ABC News headlined on November 18th, 70% of Americans say Trump's actions tied to Ukraine were wrong, and reported that 32% that say they made up their minds about impeaching the president before the news broke about Trump's July phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which Trump urged his Ukrainian counterpart to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. This poll found 100% of the 506 scientifically sampled respondents had heard at least some of the impeachment hearings, and that 51% of them agreed with the statement, President Trump's actions were wrong and he should be impeached by the House and removed from office by the Senate. While 6% agreed with President Trump's actions were wrong and he should be impeached by the House but not removed from office by the Senate. 25% agreed with President Trump's actions were not wrong. However, far more was actually involved in this phone call than allegations against the Bidens, and those allegations regarding the Bidens have themselves been grossly misrepresented in the press, as this article will show and will document in its links to the actual and most trustworthy evidence in the case. Of course, the very best evidence is the call itself, and that will therefore be the first thing linked to and discussed here. Furthermore, the American public should have been far more skeptical about the Ukrainegate narrative than they were, because at first Democrats were trying to use as their ground on which to impeach Trump, and thereby to install the current Vice President Mike Pence as being America's president, Trump's having colluded with Russia in order to win the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton. But that effort failed because it was false, and it was based on highly questionable evidence supplied largely through a firm, CrowdStrike, that the Democratic National Committee had hired in order to find dirt against then-candidate and now President Trump. Now the Democrats' ground for replacing President Donald Trump by his Vice President Mike Pence is that in Trump's July 25, 2019 phone call to Ukraine's new President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump supposedly pressured Zelensky to have Joe Biden investigated. One of the first signs of a liar is that the person switches his story, changes to a new and different reason for justifying his actions, in this case, impeachment. And this clearly is being done now by the Democrats and the news media in order to replace President Donald Trump by his Vice President Mike Pence. Consequently, Americans are insufficiently suspicious against the present impeachment hearings. Americans need to examine carefully beyond the mere surface, much deeper. The links here are provided in order to facilitate the reader's direct access to the highest quality, i.e. most trustworthy, evidence in the case, so that the reader may see, on one's own, what the news media do not report. September 25, 2019 was when a clear and copyable version of the transcript of that complete July 25th phone conversation finally became published online by Rhode Island's Providence Journal, and here is the only passage in the complete transcript where Trump mentioned Biden. 3 times, in fact, the only 3 times that the word Biden appears in the entire transcript. Quote, Rudy Giuliani very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. The former ambassador to Ukraine from the United States, the woman, Marie Yovanovitch, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news, so I just want to let you know that. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that, so whatever you can do with U.S. Attorney General William Barr would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. End quote. What prosecution, of whom, for what, and why? The media ignore these questions, when they aren't simply assuming an answer to them. But no such answer ought to be assumed. Nor should these important questions be ignored. Here the answers to those questions will be documented. Furthermore, elsewhere in that conversation, Trump said, quote, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people. The server, they say Ukraine has it. Zelensky responded by asserting that, quote, the next prosecutor general in Ukraine will be 100% my person, and that, quote, he or she will look into the situation, specifically to the company, CrowdStrike, that you mentioned in this issue. Nothing at all was said by Zelensky about any Biden at any point in the entire phone call. It wasn't mainly about the Bidens, such as the press alleges to be the case. In fact, the favor that, quote, that Trump was asking about wasn't concerning the Bidens, but it instead concerned the investigation that Trump's Attorney General, referenced here when Trump said, whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great, is now heading into the question of why Obama's FBI and entire intelligence community had proceeded with the highly suspect Christopher Steele and CrowdStrike report that the Democratic National Committee had hired under Obama in order to come up with the allegations to use against Trump, and why the Obama administration never demanded to inspect the DNC's own server in order to examine the key physical evidence in the alleged Russiagate case against Trump, much less what testimony and evidence Julian Assange might have had in the alleged Russiagate case. What did Trump mean when he said, quote, the server, they say Ukraine has it? Did Trump actually think that Zelensky could supply that physical evidence? What did he mean? What was he asking of Zelensky when Trump said, the server, they say Ukraine has it? One can't understand the impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump unless one understands accurately what was happening in Ukraine and what the motivations were of the persons who were involved in U.S.-Ukraine policy, first under U.S. President Barack Obama and then under his successor, Donald Trump. Information will be presented here about those matters which probably won't come up in the House impeachment hearings. These matters are likelier to be publicly discussed afterward when the case goes to the Senate, but might be too sensitive to be brought up even there, especially if they make both Democrat and Republican officials look bad. As such, for example, if both Democrats and Republicans had participated in a February 2014 coup against and overthrowing Ukraine's democratically elected government, and, if that had happened, as we will show it did, how this fact might affect Trump's relationship with Zelensky. So, a lot is to be shown here, and this will be the information that the news media have been hiding from the public, not reporting to the public. There are many instances of U.S. coups that the government lied about and that afterward had negative blowback. The 1953 U.S. coup against Iran's democratically elected government wasn't revealed to the American public until decades after it had happened. It had long been alleged to have been a democratic revolution in Iran. Our government and media have been lying to us for a long time, and not only about WMD in Iraq. We shall be documenting here that 1953 coup in Iran and other similar instances by the U.S. government is being repeated yet again in the case of the February 2014 U.S. coup that occurred in Ukraine. The regime is very effective at lying, at deceiving, at manipulating its public, no less than now than it was then. Without understanding the reality of Obama's coup in Ukraine, there is no way of honestly explaining Ukrainegate. The 1953 Iran coup produced as blowback the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. Obama's 2014 coup in Ukraine likewise is having its blowbacks, but of different types. Part 2. Trump's purpose in the July 25, 2019 call to Zelensky. The argument to be presented here is that Trump, in this phone call, and generally, was trying not only to obtain help with evidence gathering in the CrowdStrike matter, which AG Barr is now investigating, and which also is the reason why Trump specifically mentioned CrowdStrike at the only instance in the phone call where he was requesting a favor from Zelensky, but to change the policy toward Ukraine that had been established by Obama via Obama's coup and its aftermath. This is a fact, which will be documented here. Far more than politics was involved here. Ideology was actually very much involved. Trump was considering a basic change in U.S. foreign policies. He was considering to replace policies that had been established under and personnel who had been appointed by his immediate predecessor, Barack Obama. Democrats are extremely opposed to any such changes. This is one of the reasons for the renewed impeachment effort by Democrats. They don't want to let go of Obama's worst policies, but changing U.S. foreign policy is within a president's constitutional authority to do. Trump fired the flaming neoconservative John Bolton on September 10, 2019. This culminated a growing rejection by Trump of neoconservatism, something that he had never thought much about, but had largely continued from the Obama administration, which invaded and destroyed Libya in 2011, Syria in 2012, Yemen in 2015, and more, possibly outdoing even George W. Bush, who likewise was a flaming neocon. Trump's gradual turn away from neoconservatism wasn't just political, it was instead a reflection on his part of that maybe, just maybe, he had actually been wrong and needed to change his foreign policies in some important ways. He evidently still hasn't yet figured out precisely what those changes should be. And this is a sidebar from myself. Trump came out during the election and well before criticizing the Russia mentality, right? He wanted to have a détente with Russia as well as with China and to settle differences not just by coups and proxy wars, but by actual negotiation. And in the case of China, a trade war, which is ongoing. But I think the author is mistaken here to suggest that Trump just bumbled into this and now is just, maybe I'll turn away from neoconservatism. I believe it's fairly apparent that this has been a very strategic motion for him from the very beginning, and that his actions in support of neoconservatism have been basically very, very limited, very half-baked, and demonstrate that he is only appeasing them for the sake of continuing his own momentum and presidency and not getting Kennedy, if you will. But I think that the evidence is very clear that Trump is not a neocon, and he has basically been playing along only so much as he needs to in order for the wheel to keep turning. But that, especially when we get into his second term, I think we're going to be seeing some very interesting moves in foreign policy that are very much antagonistic to the neoconservative dream of world hegemony. Continuing on. For example, on November 15, 2019, the impeachment focus was on the testimony of Marie Yovanovitch, whom Trump had recently, in May 2018, fired as the ambassador to Ukraine. Democrats presented her as having been the paradigm of professionalism and nonpartisanship in America's foreign service. She was actually a neoconservative who had been appointed as an ambassador first by President George W. Bush on November 20th, 2004, after her having received an MS from the National War College in 2001. Obama appointed her on May 18, 2016, to replace Jeff Pyatt, as shown and heard in this video, confidentially receiving instructions from Obama's agent controlling Ukraine policy, Victoria Nuland, as the ambassador to Ukraine. Obama had selected Yovanovitch because he knew that, just like Pyatt, she supported his policies regarding Ukraine and would adhere to his instructions. Yovanovitch was part of Obama's team, just as she had previously been part of George W. Bush's team. All three of them were staunch neoconservatives, just as Ambassador Pyatt had been, and just as Victoria Nuland had been, and just as Joe Biden had been. A neoconservative believes in the rightfulness of American empire over this entire planet, even over the borders of the other nuclear superpower, Russia. Obama's standard phrase arguing for it was, quote, "The United States is and remains the one indispensable nation," meaning that all other nations are dispensable. This imperialistic belief was an extension of Yale's pacifist pro-Nazi America First movement, which was supported by Wall Street's Dulles brothers in the early 1940s, and which pro-Nazi movement Trump himself has prominently praised. This is the part of the article that the author just reveals himself as a liberal, and this is just 100% nonsense. I had to basically follow through and click through to his link. Right, his link is to the America First Committee on Wikipedia. Right, so we're just going to take a quick sidebar and read from this link about the America First Committee, and you let me know if you think this is a Nazi front, or if this is actually this was actually a genuine and authentic expression of anti-war sentiment in the United States prior to World War II. America First Committee was the foremost United States non-interventionist pressure group against the American entry into World War II. Started on September 4th, 1940, it put out mixed messaging with anti-Semitic and pro-fascist rhetoric from leading members. Whatever that, I'll check out the links later for that, and if it's interesting, I'll report them. But anyway, and it was dissolved on December 10th, 1941, 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor had brought the war to the United States. Membership peaked at 800,000 paying members in 450 chapters. It was one of the largest anti-war organizations in the history of the United States. Right, so the AFC was established September 4th, 1940 by Yale Law School student R. Douglas Stewart Jr., son of R. Douglas Stewart, co-founder of Quaker Oats, along with other students including future President Gerald Ford, future Peace Corps Director Sargent Shriver, and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart. And at its peak, America First claimed 800,000 dues-paying members in 450 chapters, located mostly in a 300-mile radius of Chicago. Two men who would later become presidents, John F. Kennedy and Gerald Ford, supported and contributed to the organization. When he donated $100 to the AFC, Kennedy attached a note which read simply, quote, "What you are doing is vital." Ford was one of the first members of the AFC when a chapter formed at Yale University. Additionally, Potter Stewart, a future Supreme Court justice, served on the original committee of the AFC. When the war began in September 1939, most Americans, including politicians, demanded neutrality regarding Europe. Although most Americans supported strong measures against Japan, Europe was the focus of the America First Committee. The public mood was changing, however, especially after the fall of France in the spring of 1940. The America First Committee launched a petition aimed at enforcing the 1939 Neutrality Act and forcing President FDR to keep his pledge to keep America out of the war. They profoundly distrusted Roosevelt and argued that he was lying to the American people. On the day after Roosevelt's Lend-Lease bill was submitted to the United States Congress, Wood promised AFC opposition with all the vigor it can exert. America First staunchly opposed the convoying of ships, the Atlantic Charter, and the placing of economic pressure on Japan. In order to achieve the defeat of Lend-Lease and the perpetuation of American neutrality, the AFC advocated four basic principles. The United States must build an impregnable defense for America. No foreign power nor group of powers can successfully attack a prepared America. American democracy can be preserved only by keeping out of the European war. An age short of war weakens national defense at home and threatens to involve America in war abroad. Right? So Mr. Zeus, I guess, apparently believes that those are Nazi principles, right? Okay, sounds like some solid logic to me. Charles Lindbergh was admired in Germany and allowed to see the buildup of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, in 1937. He was impressed by its strength and secretly reported his findings to the General Staff of the United States Army, warning them that the U.S. had fallen behind and that it must urgently build up its aviation. He had feuded with the Roosevelt administration for years. His first radio speech was broadcast on September 15, 1939, on all three of the major radio networks. He urged listeners to look beyond the speeches and propaganda that they were being fed and instead look at who was writing the speeches and reports, who owned the papers, and who influenced the speakers. On June 20th, 1941, Lindbergh spoke to 30,000 people in Los Angeles and billed it as a peace and preparedness mass meeting. Lindbergh criticized those movements which he perceived were leading America into the war. He proclaimed that the United States was in a position that made it virtually impregnable. He claimed that the interventionists and the British who called for the defense of England really meant the defeat of Germany. Nothing did more to escalate the tensions than the speech which Lindbergh delivered to a rally in Des Moines, Iowa on September 11, 1941. In that speech, he identified the forces pulling America into the war as the British, the Roosevelt administration, and American Jews. While he expressed sympathy for the plight of Jews in Germany, he argued that America's entry into the war would serve them little better. He said, in part, the following: "It is not difficult to understand why Jewish people desire the overthrow of Nazi Germany. The persecution they suffered in Germany would be sufficient to make bitter enemies of any race. No person with a sense of the dignity of mankind can condone the persecution of the Jewish race suffered in Germany. But no person of honesty and vision can look on their pro-war policy here today without seeing the dangers involved in such a policy, both for us and for them. Instead of agitating for war, the Jewish groups in this country should be opposing it in every possible way, for they will be among the first to feel its consequences. Tolerance is a virtue that depends upon peace and strength. History shows that it cannot survive war and devastation. A few far-sighted Jewish people realize this and stand opposed to intervention, but the majority still do not. Their greatest danger to this country lies in their large ownership and influence in our motion pictures, our press, our radio, and our government." Right, so that's, I guess, the anti-Semitic aspect of America First and Charles Lindbergh. Sounds not anti-Semitic to me at all. Sounds like a guy who's actually trying to help the Jewish people as part of trying to help all people, but specifically trying to help the people of America. But instead, as he's indicating, the majority of American Jews took an international position that was basically self-serving for the elite groups of the Jewish organizations. And, basically this is a whole can of worms and a whole topic, again, with the, I forget what the name of the agreement was, but basically it was as a result of an agreement with National Socialist Germany and Adolf Hitler that basically the State of Israel was created. Basically the movement of German Jews to Palestine was absolutely something facilitated by Adolf Hitler himself. Right. So again, this is they use these words anti-Semitic. It means nothing. I called it at the beginning of the year. 2019 was the year when these words completely lost their power. Racist, bigot, xenophobe, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody fucking cares. You idiotic liberals, just stop. We don't care anymore. You can keep throwing these words. It's like throwing a cotton ball at an iron wall at this point, and nobody cares. Right. We're going forward with the truth, and at this point it's do or die. It's life or death for us as individuals and our nation, and for everyone who values freedom. If you want to live as a communist slave, go ahead and just go back to sleep, keep playing video games, go and watch the commie propaganda movies that now is 100% of everything that comes out of Hollywood, and just wait to lick the hands of your masters who feed you. But those of us with minds of actual capability and with eyes to see and ears to hear, we will keep resisting this at every single turn, and we will not be afraid of little bitch ass words like anti-Semite. Right? I've already virtue signaled enough on this. I've got Jews in my family who I love. This is not about Jews. This is about evil, and this is about people who deceive others for the sake of their own benefit, of their in-group. And, you know, I don't care who you are. If you want to sell out the American people for the sake of your special interest group, you can go fuck yourself. I don't care if you're Jewish or Gentile. I don't care if you're black or white. If you think that you can just deceive people and sell them out for the sake of your own benefit, I'm going to be here to call you out, and I'm not the only one, and I'll not be afraid to do so. Continuing on. Communists were anti-war until June 1941, and they tried to infiltrate or take over America first. After Hitler attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941, they reversed positions and denounced the AFC as a Nazi front, a group infiltrated by German agents. Nazis also tried to use the committee. At the trial of the aviator and orator Laura Ingalls, the prosecution revealed that her handler, Ulrich Freiherr von Glineth, a German diplomat, had encouraged her to participate in committee activities. After the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, AFC canceled a rally with Lindbergh at Boston Garden in view of recent critical developments, and the organization's leaders announced their support of the war effort. Lindbergh gave the rationale. Quote, "We have been stepping closer to war for many months. Now it has come, and we must meet it as united Americans regardless of our attitude in the past toward the policy our government has followed. Whether or not that policy has been wise, our country has been attacked by force of arms, and by force of arms we must retaliate. Our own defenses and our own military position have already been neglected too long. We must now turn every effort to building the greatest and most efficient Army, Navy, and Air Force in the world. When American soldiers go to war, it must be with the best equipment that modern skill can design and that modern industry can build." With the formal declaration of war against Japan, the organization chose to disband. On December 11th, the committee leaders met and voted for dissolution, the same day Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. In the statement, which they released to the press, was the following. "Our principles were right. Had they been followed, war could have been avoided. No good purpose can now be served by considering what might have been had our objectives been attained. We are at war. Today, though there may be many important subsidiary considerations, the primary objective is not difficult to state. It can be completely defined in one word: victory." Conservative commentator Pat Buchanan has praised America First and used its name as a slogan. "The achievements of that organization are monumental," writes Buchanan. "By keeping America out of World War II until Hitler attacked Stalin in June 1941, Soviet Russia, not America, bore the brunt of the fighting, bleeding, and dying to defeat Nazi Germany." So that's basically the America First Committee. What, Eric Zeus says is pacifist and pro-Nazi, right? The same group that disbanded as soon as Germany declared war on the United States and said, well, now it's real, brothers, let's go to war, right? It's just nonsense. And again, this is an example of a good liberal position, but it's still wrong, right? Even though this is a good liberal position, I'll take the good and I'll set aside the bullshit, right? Right there is bullshit. And, basically, anyway, we'll continue on. Unlike the progressive U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had planned the UN in order to be the anti-imperialist emerging first ever global world government of nations, which would democratically set and ultimately enforce international laws of a new global federation of nations. Jesus fucking Christ. A global democratic federation of sovereign republics, neoconservatives are U.S. imperialists who want instead to destroy the UN and extend American power over the entire world, make America not only the policeman to the world, but the lawmaker for the world, and the judge, jury, and executioner of the world, the global dictator. The UN would be weakened to insignificance. This has gradually been occurring. It continued even after what had been thought to have been the 1991 end of the Cold War, and after Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2009 for his deceptive rhetoric. Yale's John Bolton was the leading current proponent of the America First viewpoint, much more straightforward in his advocacy of it than the far wilier Obama was, and until recently, Trump supported that unhinged advocacy for the neoconservative viewpoint, U.S. imperialism. Regarding the campaign to take over Russia, however, he no longer does. He has broken with Bolton on that central neoconservative goal, and he is trying to reverse that policy, which had been even more extreme than Obama's policy towards Russia, which policy had in fact produced the coup in Ukraine. Quick sidebar on that. I mean, again, Trump basically came out during the election in 2016 and said, we should talk to Russia, right? To Russia, we should not be trying to go to war with a nuclear superpower. We should talk to them and basically see, where we can work together on things and where we can address the conflicts that we do have, right? And I guess to Eric Zeus, that doesn't matter at all, right? Trump, yes, he has taken many positions and stances to seem tough on Russia, mainly because from the very beginning of his presidency, he's been accused of being a Russian asset by crazy liberals who have no evidence whatsoever, just bullshit from Rachel Maddow. And again, the Steele dossier, which is even more bullshit than Rachel Maddow's show. Actually, nothing could be more bullshit than Rachel Maddow's show. I take that back. But anyway, yes, I guess you can say that Trump, in those nominal movements is, a neoconservative. But again, actions matter more than words. And like the last video that we went over, the unsecret doctrine of Trump revealed, he is playing this as best he can. And you can't come out in a world built on lies and just say exactly what you want to do and what you're doing. You have to basically work in layers of deception, and I think that Trump is using lies to tell the truth rather than using lies to just tell lies. But anyway, continuing on. When the Cold War had supposedly ended in 1991, it ended actually only on the Russian side, but secretly it continued and continues on as policy on the American imperialist side. The neoconservative side, which controlled the U.S. government by that time, FDR's vision having been destroyed when Ronald Reagan entered the White House in 1981, has no respect whatsoever for Russia's sovereignty over its own land, and certainly not over the land of Russia's neighbors, such as Ukraine, which has a 1,625-mile border with Russia. Neoconservatives want U.S. missiles to be pointed at Moscow all along Russia's border. That would be as if Russia had wanted to position Russian missiles all along Canada's and Mexico's border with the U.S., It would disgust any decent person anywhere, but neoconservatives aren't decent people. Neoconservatives, U.S. imperialists, seek for all of Russia's neighbors to become part of the U.S. empire so as to isolate Russia and then become able to gobble it up. All neoconservatives want this ultimately to happen. Their grasp for power is truly limitless. Only in the tactical issues do they differ from one another. And if you want to see my satirical take on the point made in that paragraph, I'm going to go back to one of our old videos from 2016. If Russia acted like the USA, and essentially I played that out in satirical fashion of what that would look like. Basically, of basically Russia inciting a coup in New Mexico and basically trying to take over New Mexico. Because that's essentially what it is. The U.S. trying to take over Ukraine and incorporate it into NATO is essentially if the Soviet Empire basically overthrew the government of New Mexico and was trying to incorporate it into the Warsaw Pact and make it a Soviet vassal state. Continuing on, in her testimony behind closed doors to senators on October 11, 2019, Yovanovitch stated her views regarding what America's policies toward Ukraine should be. And these were Obama's policies too. These views are the neoconservative outlook, and my own comments in brackets here will indicate her most egregious distortions and lies in this key passage from her. Because of Ukraine's geostrategic position bordering Russia on its east, the warm waters of the oil-rich Black Sea to its south, and 4 NATO allies to its west, it is critical to the security of the United States. And in brackets, Eric Zeus says, this is like saying that Mexico and Canada are critical to the security of Russia. It's a lie. Continuing, that Ukraine remain free and democratic, meaning to neoconservatives under U.S. control, and that it continued to resist Russian expansionism. Like Russia cares about U.S. expansionism all over the Western Hemisphere? Really? Is that really what this is about? It's about extending U.S. imperialism on and across Russia's border into Russia itself. Russia's purported annexation of Crimea, but actually clear and convincing evidence will be presented here that under U.S. President Barack Obama, the U.S. government had a detailed plan, which was already active in June 2013, to take over Russia's main naval base, which is in Sevastopol in Crimea, and turn it into a U.S. naval base. Its invasion of eastern Ukraine and its de facto control over the Sea of Azov make clear Russia's malign intentions toward Ukraine. Not to make clear Russia's determination not to be surrounded by enemies, by U.S. stooge regimes. For Russia to avoid that is malign, she says. If we allow Russia's actions to stand, we will set a precedent that the United States will regret for decades to come. So, supporting Ukraine's integration into Europe and combating Russia's efforts to destabilize Ukraine. Oh, America didn't do that destabilization? Have anchored our policy since the Ukrainian people protested on the Maidan in 2014 and demanded to be a part of Europe and live according to the rule of law. But Ukrainians before Obama's takeover of Ukraine in February 2014 didn't actually want to be a part of the EU, nor of NATO, and they considered NATO to be a threat to Ukraine. In 2010, Gallup found that whereas 17% of Ukrainians considered NATO to mean protection for your country, 40% said it's a threat to your country. That was U.S. policy when I became ambassador in August 2016, after Obama's successful coup there took over its media and turned Ukrainian opinion strongly against Russia. And it was reaffirmed as the policy of the current administration in early 2017. Yes, that's correct. Finally, a truthful assertion from her. When Trump first came into office, he was a neoconservative too. The revolution of dignity, you'll see here the dignity of it, and the Ukrainian people's demand to end corruption forced the new Ukrainian government to take measures to fight the rampant corruption that long permeated that country's political and economic systems, and that still do, and perhaps now more than ever. That's just one example. It's about the role of Ambassador Yovanovitch, but the focus of Ukrainegate really isn't about that. It's not Yovanovitch. It's what Trump was trying to do, and what Joe Biden was trying to do, and what Obama had actually done. It is also about Joe Biden's son Hunter, because this is also about contending dynasties, and not only about contending individuals. Trump isn't certain now that he wants to continue being a full-fledged neoconservative, and to continue extending Obama's neoconservative policies regarding Ukraine. So, this is largely about what those policies actually were. And here is how Joe Biden comes into the picture, because Democrats, in trying to replace President Donald Trump by President Mike Pence, are trying to restore, actually, Barack Obama's policy in Ukraine, a policy of which the Bidens themselves were very much Obama's agents, and Mike Pence would be expected to continue and extend those policies. Here will be necessary to document some personal and business relationships that the U.S. news media have consistently been hiding and even lying about, and which might not come up even in the expected subsequent Senate hearings about whether to replace Trump by Pence.